Okay, hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar on strategies for fundraising and grant writing. My name is Bahia Simons-Lane. I'm the Executive Director of US JETAA and I'll be your moderator for today. In case you're not familiar with US JETAA, it's a 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization that was established to support the network of JET alumni and JETAA chapters in the United States. The mission of US JETAA is to provide support and resources to JET alumni chapters and individual JET alumni throughout the United States in order to strengthen the capacity of the JETAA network. US JETAA supports JETAA chapter leadership with programming, membership recruitment, chapter management, leadership, professional development, and fundraising. I'm going to take a moment to tell you very briefly about some of our current programming. We have a microgrant initiative for American JETs, which is funded by the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, which allows current JETs to get small amounts of funding to do projects with their schools and communities in Japan. We also have 2 programs for JETAA chapters in leadership other than this webinar series. We have a grant, we partner with Sasakawa USA to do a grant program for JETAA chapters and subchapters. This allows JETAA chapters to apply for funding that will let them hold more events than they normally would, anything from Japanese language learning to JET 30 celebrations. We also do mentorship site visits. We have recently visited the JETAA alumni chapter in Boston and the chapter in Portland, and we will soon be going to visit the chapter in Boulder, Colorado. These site visits are funded by the Japan Foundation CGP and CLARE and allow US JETAA to get to know the chapters, find out their strengths, and find out how we can help them best. Now I'd like to just briefly introduce today's topic and speakers. And for the speakers, I'd like to ask that at the beginning of your presentation, you introduce yourself before you start. So today we have Laurel Lukaszewski. I'm sorry, Laurel, I probably just butchered your name. Laurel is the previous Executive Director for US JETAA. She is also on our Board of Directors. She was an ALT in Kagoshima from 1990 to 1992. She will be presenting today on effective grant writing. We also have Elizabeth Brailsford. She's a project manager, writer, and editor at the Panagora Group. She was a JET in Niigata from 2004 to 2007, and she will be presenting on fundraising. Lastly, we have Maya Fisher. She's the Director of Education and Tomodachi Programs with the U.S.-Japan Council. She was a JET in Kanagawa from 2000 to 2002, and she will be presenting on grants from the perspective of funders. Now, without further ado, I am going to pass the baton over to Laurel so she can begin. I'd also like to remind you all that during the session, you should keep your mic muted. If you have questions that come up, you can send it in the chat box on the bottom right, or save it to the very, very end after all 3 presentations.
Hi, everyone. This is Laurel Lukaszewski, and I'm pleased to be speaking to you about effective grant writing. As Bahia mentioned, I previously worked as the US JETAA Executive Director, and I'm pleased to be continuing to work with US JETAA on the board. Today's topic is really a good one, I think, for all chapters, and I think that it will be useful no matter what stage you're in, both for the JETAA chapters and also just in general. I think it's always useful information to have because many times people have to write grants in other parts of their lives as well. So I'm just giving an overview, and this isn't for any particular grant funder, but hopefully it will be broad enough to serve as a nice outline. To begin, basically, the most important thing, of course, is identifying resources. And typical JETAA funding resources include, the ones CLARE, MOFA, US JETAA, foundations, and local supporters. And there are certain things you need to keep in mind when looking at potential funding. The first one is, do they require 501c3 nonprofit status? A lot of them do. Most foundations won't give funding to organizations that don't have 501c3 status. A lot of corporations prefer to give donations to organizations with nonprofits with the 501c3 status because that enables them to give tax deductible donations. But even if you don't have that status, a lot of times you can work with other organizations that do. And one of the partners that you always can have is US JETAA. That's one of the reasons that we organized ourselves the way that we did. A second thing that's really important when you're starting to look at potential resources and funders is what types of programs and organizations does a funder typically fund, or a grantor typically fund. And that's important because you don't want to be approaching someone if you're not even close to what their focus is. I mean, you want to find a good match. Once you've found a good match, you also need to make sure that you know their deadlines. Both for initial inquiries, some places require you to send a short concept letter before you send in a full proposal. Other times they want the full proposal first, so you need to be sure you understand that. Also be aware of what aspects of a program or project they're willing to fund. Not all funders will give you administrative or overhead costs. Some will not allow you to buy equipment. So there are things like that that you need to be aware of. And then you also want to just have on your radar, what the timeline is for notification, for receiving funding, for implementation, for reporting, and does it sync with your calendar? If you know that you want to do a program in April and their deadline is in March, chances of you getting the money in time for your program, that it's really tight. So you just want to make sure that your calendar is syncing with their calendar so that you can effectively use the funds if you do get them. The next step, of course, is before actually writing a proposal, you need to know what you're asking for. As you start to create an idea for a program, say that you're going to do a festival, like a film festival, it's like you need to know things like, what is the objective and rationale for the project? Why are you the one that needs to be doing this? Once you know what you're going to do, how are you going to accomplish this objective? You need to make sure that you have the capacity to do what it is that you're proposing. Who will be involved? Are your members going to be involved? Are you going to have to hire someone? So then you're going to have to ask for funding to hire someone, or is everyone volunteering? Are they all on board? Are they going to see the project through? And that's the same with, are there partners you need to work with to make this happen, and who are they? You also need to be aware of what the outcomes are. What are your objectives? Why do you want to do this, and what's going to come out of it? You need to know your timeline, and you should have in the back of your head why this funder is the best one to fund your objective. That's very important because you need to make a case to them. Why should they be funding you and your ideas? Do your research. You want to find the right funding partner. And so before starting to write, make sure you know exactly what they want from you to submit for a proposal. It's like, do you need letters of support? Some places require that you have additional partners. So you want to get those letters. Do you need bios of your speakers? Just anything, just be very aware of what you need. And most funders on their websites, they list all of the items that you need. There's usually a very nice template that you can follow. And don't be afraid to contact a funder and ask questions. If it's something that US JETAA is providing a grant for, call, email. Most funders are more than happy to answer questions and to let you know if an idea that you have is worth pursuing. The other thing is most funders provide lists of previous grantees and projects along with the amounts that they've funded. So that gives you a really good idea if what you want to do falls within their scope of what they've generally funded. You know, usually proposals follow a format suggested by the funder. Follow the format. If they tell you that they want 500-word narrative, then give them that. Give them a budget. You know, follow whatever it is and they all differ. But usually it's out there. And if they're not strict about what to do, just make sure everything you provide is concise. And of course, pay attention to the submission deadline as well as the deadlines for successful proposals, because you also want to make sure, once again, that their deadlines match up with your deadlines and that you'll be able to accomplish everything in the time frame that you have. So basically, once you've found an awesome funder that wants to fund your great project, you need to ask for the money. And the most important thing to do is to be clear and outline what you need concisely. You should always state, and if you can get this in the first paragraph or two, it's really important. Let them know who you are. They might not know about your organization. They might not know for JETAA. They might not know what JET is. So make sure that that's clear. Don't assume that they know about JET. Be sure to state your objective and your proposed activity. Just a brief summary is important, and why it's necessary. Funders want to fund projects that can't happen without their support, and so that's really important to explain to them why it's a good project. Also, let them know how much support you're asking for up front. Don't make them wait until the very end until they see the budget. If you're asking for $5,000, state that you're asking for $5,000 for this project. And also, let them know when you need the funds up front, just so that they understand, that you understand their timeline and your own timeline. After you've done your introductory paragraph where you've sort of laid out the primary information, you get to explain a little bit more about your project. And this is a great opportunity to sell yourself, sell your organization, and to really get people excited about your idea. And what you want to do is provide a clear description and vision. Don't ramble on and don't go on tangents. You don't want to lose your audience. Provide a timeline. Describe in clear detail why the project is important and the impact it will have on your members, the community, or your target audience. Most funders want to see what the impact will be. So that's just something to keep in mind the whole time you're writing. What are the specific activities that you're going to undertake, and how will you make them happen? Make sure, give them details, and let them see that you've thought through the whole process and the whole program, from the idea to the planning stages to getting a committee together to the implementation. And make sure that it's clear that you really need the funding. If it's not obvious that you need funding, there's a chance that they're not going to want to fund you because they don't see that it's important. And so make sure that they understand how important their funding is for your plan. And if you have plans to disseminate information outside of, say, an event, say that you're documenting it through recordings, or you're videotaping it, or there's going to be a publication afterwards of, summaries of speakers of a panel or something like that, make sure you include that, because it shows that the project will have a lasting impact. As you conclude your proposal, reiterate the importance of the project and its anticipated impact. And make sure, if you have an idea of the number of people who will be involved or impacted by it, let them know. And it doesn't have to be a specific number, but if you know that you have 200 alumni that are on your mailing list, that's your potential audience. So you can always, think about who might come to a certain event that you're asking funding for. If you have specific budgetary requests, say that you know that a room rental is going to be $500 and you know that printing costs are $75, make sure that you include those in the narrative as well as in the budget, and make sure that the numbers match. So if you're asking for $500 for room rental in your narrative, make sure you're asking for the same amount in the budget. And you don't have to give line by line in the narrative, but the overall budget amount should definitely match what your budget says in your proposal. And once again, if the project has a life beyond the event date, or even beyond the scope of the grant period, be sure to let them know that. If the information is going to reside on your website indefinitely so that people can access it even after the program is over, make sure that you say that in your proposal. The budget. Most important thing is to do your research. I think it's important to be conservative. Think about what you might, that the amount that you're asking for is what the funder usually funds. Don't ask a funder for, $20,000 if they normally give grants of $2,500. Be sure that you're asking for a realistic amount from the funder. Sometimes, and a lot of times, funders require funding from more than one source, but that can also be from, from admission tickets. If you think that you're going to get 20% of your income for a project from selling tickets to a film festival, then you put that in there so that the funder can see that you have other support from outside sources. Confirm, once again, the budget items that a funder will cover. If a lot of times they'll only give you like 10% of an overall budget towards overhead. So be aware of what the limitations are. Once again, make sure your budget matches your narrative request. And if they provide a suggested budget template, use it. Even if you have an awesome Excel spreadsheet that you like to use in your office, if they have one that they require, definitely use theirs. And you can always use your own on the back end, but it helps you in the long run when you're reporting. And then, of course, be clear on what their guidelines are for spending, documenting expenses, and reporting. Save all of your receipts. Submitting your proposal, once again, review the submission requirements. Do they have a cover sheet? Does it require one or multiple original signatures? How many copies do you need to submit? In some cases, you need to submit 1 copy online and 5 hard copies that you send in the mail. Make sure that every single piece of information they're asking for is included in that envelope that you're sending in, or is included in the attachments that you're forwarding on. Make sure you know whether the submission deadline is a receive date or a postmark date. That makes a big difference. And you should also think about, when you should expect to hear back. If they're not going to get back to you until the spring, then you can wait there. But otherwise, I think that's pretty much it for the submission. When you hear back that you've gotten a successful proposal, that's awesome. But this is where the real work begins. And I think it's really important to keep these things in mind when you've been notified that your proposal has been accepted. The very first thing is see if their approved budget amounts match the budget amounts that you put in your proposal. Sometimes they are different. Sometimes you'll get, a little bit less on certain items. Sometimes you'll get a little bit more on other items. So just make sure that you have a good understanding of how much money you are actually getting. Double check the program timeline and make sure that you're going to be able to implement your complete project during the date specified in your grant agreement. And read the grant agreement carefully and make sure there's nothing in there that you're confused by, or that there aren't deadlines that you aren't going to be able to meet. Also make note that there are oftentimes interim reports that are due. So if so, note the deadline and make sure you understand the amount of information the funder requires at this stage. Sometimes it's just simply a progress report, even just a paragraph. Other times it's a full-on like interim proposal, report where you're including expenditures to date and activities you've already undertaken. Make sure that all of the partners that were in your proposal are still willing to work with you once you've gotten funding. Sign and submit the grant agreement if you agree with all of the terms. If there's something in the grant agreement that you don't agree with or that you have questions about, make sure you ask before you sign the grant agreement. Make note of your record keeping requirements, save your receipts, and even if you don't need to submit them, it's always good to hold on to anything. A lot of times they don't require the hard copy receipts, but if they come back and have a question about something, it helps you so much to be able just to pull out a receipt and say, this is what it was spent on. Also, as you begin implementing your project, keep notes on your progress. It's so helpful because you forget what steps you've taken once you're at the very end, once you've gotten the big event done and everything is taken care of, you forget what you had to do in the early stages. And so if you document your progress, it really does help. And also keep your funder apprised of your progress and let them know if there are significant changes. If, for example, you had a speaker that was traveling from New York to Seattle, but now it turns out that they're going to be there anyway and you don't need to use that money for their airline ticket, that's something that you may be able to reallocate to a different portion of your program if you let your funder know it. And lastly, remember your deadlines. Many grants have a date by which funds must be spent and activities must be completed. Anyone that works with the CLARE GIA knows this, but that's usually different than the final reporting deadline. So just be aware of when you are, when things are due and make sure you abide by them. And if you have issues meeting those things, let your funder know as soon as possible. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope that it's been informative, and certainly I welcome any questions as we go on.
Hello, this is Liz Brailsford. And Laurel, do you want to make me presenter? Or Bahia? Perfect.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we're not at the right slide there. I just wanted to say to everybody who is listening in, we're going to leave you on mute until the end, so please hold your questions until the very end of all three presentations. Or you can write your questions in the chat box at the bottom right, and we'll take them at the end. Now I'm going to turn it over to you, Liz.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. This is Liz Brailsford, like I said, and I was really involved with the Alumni Association. I live now in DC, but lived in Minnesota for some years, and served as many different roles on the Minnesota Alumni Association, including president for some years, and then also served as president of the Japan America Society of Minnesota for some years, and also vice president of the St. Paul Nagasaki Sister City Committee, and now has been in DC for the last year and a half or so. So I'm going to be giving you a fundraising overview. I'm going to run through it pretty quickly, but if there's any questions, we can answer those at the end. So basically, the first thing that you want to do is some preparation. This is probably going to be the most important part of your fundraising initiative, and you want to clearly think about why you're fundraising and what you're fundraising for. And so along with that thought, you want to think about the benefits and value adds that you are going to be offering your various donors. Along with the economy crash in 2007 and 2008, that really ushered in an era of cost efficiencies, doing more with less, and really the idea that organizations want to know what their dollars are being spent for, and they want to see a lot of transparency with that. They're probably going to be doing a cost-benefit analysis to see if it's really worth them spending their dollars on you. So the most important thing that you can do is to clearly define and think about what the benefits are. What are you offering all of these donors? Also, what type of members are you going to have? Are you looking for corporate members? Are you just looking for sponsors for specific events or initiatives that your local chapter will be doing? And what type of donors are you looking for? Are you looking for corporate donors? Are you looking for private individuals? Do you want donors that are just going to be general donations to overhead and administration and operations and things like that? So clearly think about what you're looking for, and then also think about your donor levels. So are you going to have that silver, gold, and platinum level? Maybe that's a little generic. You'll probably be a lot more creative than that. Maybe it's going to be Japan related. You have a Sakura level with some other stuff. I don't know, but do you have a partner in service donation level of maybe like around 250, or like that nonprofit organization status, 250, maybe your next is 500, the next is 1,000 or 2,000, and always have something that's kind of that gold standard at the very top, so maybe you have a 5,000 top level or something like that, but clearly define that. And once you've figured all of that out, then you want to prepare your website. So I would devote a page on your website to all of this information. So the types of members that you're looking for. Maybe you have a donation button for leaders in your community or private citizens or whoever that may be. They can donate easily on your website. Additionally, maybe you have another button for the process or application for corporations to become a corporate member. So maybe you have both of those things. You definitely have all your donation levels on there. That clearly shows what benefits they get for each level and how much each level is. And then you want to have that look really attractive on your website. And then you want to also have an attractive hard copy material. So something that looks good and is pretty slick and you can take to your meetings that you'll have. Maybe it's a brochure about your organization. Maybe it's a JET program general brochure that they have. Maybe it's some printouts of pictures of your events with some descriptions. You definitely want to have the donor levels printed out and a nice looking, nice piece of collateral for that. So just think about those types of things that you can make into a brochure or some type of package that you can bring with you. So once you've prepared all of that, and that might be a little bit of the most time consuming, you are going to move to finding your potential sources. So get creative and do your research. I'm not going to go through all this. You can read this, but basically there's a list. Every city and town has something. If you hear a siren here, sorry about that, in my neighborhood. Anyway, every city and town has their own Japan-related councils and organizations. You can often find members listed on their website. So do a little bit of snooping and look at these organizations online. Can you find US-based Japan headquartered companies in your area? That's a really good place to look. Also, networking. So just remain open. If you are networking or you're out and about professionally or personally or whatever it may be, keep your eyes peeled and your heart open to whatever contact that may be fruitful or may be a good contact for this type of fundraising for your local alumni association chapter. You never know who you'll meet and what will happen, so keep open to that. And then get creative. I know in Minneapolis at the YMCA where I used to go, there was a wall where they had their list of donors and sustaining contributors and things like that. Also, my local theater where we used to go sometimes would have a wall of their donations, of their donors. So check those out. Sometimes they have organizations that just do grants or just do charitable giving, things like that. And maybe you can't make the connection to Japan, but you can make the connection to education or culture, things like that. So if you can make that link and start the connection, then that's a great thing. So just keep your eyes peeled wherever you go. So now that you've prepared, you've asked one of your partners or potential donors for a meeting. You know, a lot of these people are really busy, so maybe you can just score a phone call for 15 minutes. You want to be really cognizant of their time and how busy they are, but maybe you just get a phone call. But if you can, the gold standard would be an in-person meeting. You'll want to go wherever they are, make it convenient for them. Yeah, so you take 30 minutes of their time, maybe an hour, but you're going to go very dressed professionally and conservatively. I tend to go to these meetings and go gray or black or navy suits, nothing too short, nothing too tight, nothing too low cut. Just be really conservative and professional. You're going to bring your hard copy materials that I talked about a couple of minutes ago, so bring that nice looking, attractive, professional looking package with you, and just be confident. You're a professional, act like one, just be confident in your ask, and it'll come across really, really nicely. And then over ask, and so a lot of, rule of thumb is I often ask for double. So if you ask for $5,000 at that top level, maybe you're intending to get $2,000, but you're hoping to at least get $1,000. So just over ask whoever it is. And, the worst thing they can say is no, or no, I can't meet that level, but how about 2,000? I can't do the 5. So that's a really helpful tip. And like I mentioned, with the age of transparency and wanting to know how their dollars are being spent, organizations are often restricting their funds these days. So you either have restricted or unrestricted, and if they are restricted, then that organization wants to restrict their funds to a specific thing that you're doing, an initiative or an event or something like that, and you really need to pay attention to that. So make a great paper trail, keep your receipts, and be really careful how you spend those dollars, because they have to be spent with the way that organization asks you to spend their money. So now you've made the ask, now what? You're going to make it as easy as possible for them. You're going to send a thank you email within 24 hours that has all of your contact information in it, and you're going to attach the electronic version of all of the paper copies that you brought to the meeting and any other relevant information you'd like to attach. And just keep in mind that fundraising is the long game and the relationship game. So I can remember spending, trying to get some clients on upwards of a year or even more. So just keep in mind that this is not going to take one night, or it's not going to happen in a week. So keep in touch. Don't lose your current partners. Keep in mind that once you get that $1,000 bucks, you're feeling really good, but don't leave them alone then. You want to gently keep in touch, not too often, but maybe a quarterly touch point is a good timeline, and make sure to keep them in the loop of, keep them abreast of what's going on with your organization. Maybe you're inviting them to events, but in any case, it's the long game, so keep in touch. Maybe they say no to your initial ask, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask them again in a year. Maybe it's not the right timing for them. So just keep in touch and keep a good relationship with your current donors and future donors. And then again, just be transparent. If you did make the ask and they did give the money, be transparent with how you're spending those funds. So you're keeping in touch with everybody, and another thing to think about is be creative. What are the alternatives there? So maybe an organization can't give money. Maybe it's that they give in-kind things, so they supply you with materials or other supplies. Maybe they supply food for one of your events. Can they be a speaker or a panelist at one of your events? Can they donate their time? That's a really important thing because a lot of people are really busy, so that's valuable for them. Also, can they be a host? Can you have an event at their space, or can they arrange for space somewhere so you don't have to fork over that money? So there are other ways that organizations can be engaged with yours and can donate in some way, but think alternatively if the need comes up. I know I went through that pretty quickly, but thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions at the end. I'll just pass it on. Bahia, do you want me to send it on to Maya?
I'm going to go ahead and take it real quick.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz, for that really informative presentation. Maya Fisher is up next, and she'll be our last presenter. Maya, after Maya, we will be taking questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So my name is Maya Fisher. I spent 2 years as a JET in Kawasaki, as the introduction said. I've spent most of my career in the international education and exchange space. I've worked for organizations that have served as funders, as my current position, as well as a recipient of institutional grants and others types. So today I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to talk about all of this from the funder's perspective. I think what's important, you've heard a little bit about sort of general fundraising, you've heard a little bit about writing grants. And so I wanted to share with you a few things from my perspective as a funder. One of the biggest challenges that we find with applicants to us and in other positions that I've been in is finding a funder that fits. Laurel talked a little bit about this, but I will say the US-Japan community space is small and resources are finite. To be honest, there are a lot of the organizations that were listed in Liz's presentation, have existing relationships. They have grants that they've given to organizations over long periods of time. They have established relationships. So if you as a first-time grantee are going in to ask for funds, you face a big challenge of trying to figure out if you are somebody that they can and should fund. So I encourage you to think creatively to identify new or free up existing resources. Of course, you can go to the sort of the usual suspects in the pool, but I think it's also important to be a little bit dynamic in your thinking. If you have a program or idea, think about its value from multiple angles, and that might actually, jog some creative thinking about other sources that you might tap into in terms of funding. The third one is, you really want to identify a funder that has common mission and vision. As your organization, your event, your program, or your proposal. You can find organizations or companies whose sort of broad message applies, as well as, sort of their narrower messages of what they do in their CSR or their foundational activities. But it's really important alignment with your funder and fit is really important. They really, really do go together. And as Laurel had mentioned, spend time getting to know the organization or organizations that you're applying to for funding. Even if it's $500, $1,000, $5,000, sometimes you just got to put a lot of work into making the case. One thing you want to think about is, are you proposing something that they're already doing? If it's slightly different or just different, you have to have a really good reason why they should, in addition to what they're already funding, fund you. So think about that. What does their current portfolio look like? Would your program or your idea or your activity fit into what they're already doing, or is it something that's totally different, which could be fine, but you also want to be able to be sure that you can connect your totally different idea to what it is that they're doing. How is it adding? How is it contributing to their broader goals? Does your requested amount fit within their general average grant size or funding size? Some of them will give you an average, some of them will give you sort of a maximum, and some of them may not give you a minimum, but it never hurts to ask. But sort of understanding and aligning your expectations with what they have available is really key. What are their impact metrics? What does success for them look like? What are the outcomes that they're looking for? A lot of times you can see this exhibited in their existing program, materials. You might also see it in their proposal, their call for proposals, so their ask. But you want to know their impact metrics, and does that fit with what your outcomes are for your project or your proposal or your planned activity? Is that something that you can measure? Is it something that you can evaluate? So make sure that your metrics and your impacts fit with what they're expecting. And then the last piece is, what do they expect from their grantees? Reading agreements. So if you're awarded a grant, reading the agreement carefully to know what is expected of you as a grantee is really important because you have responsibilities, your funder has responsibilities, and when those are not aligned, it's really, really challenging. So encompassing all of this, if you are able to find a funder that fits, then you go to the sort of the next piece of this. I know it's been talked a little bit about already, but the proposal, your application, your ask, it's really important. Sometimes it's the only information that we as funders have, so you have to make sure that all of the information that you give us as a funder is on point. So you're tasked with the proposal, especially in written form. Anything that's written is to make the case for your activity or program clearly and cogently. Leave no room for interpretation. Of course, this is a challenge, I think, for a lot of people. What I find when really frustrating when looking into applications is people who just assume that the reader knows things, or the reader, just sort of understands or knows the organization that's applying. So it's your responsibility as the applicant to really be explicit. Explicitly align your proposals with the company or the organization's mission. This is probably the second biggest reason that we deny proposals. Of course, we're not expecting you to sort of, contort what you're planning into fitting with the organization's goals. But we do expect to see alignment and clear alignment. So it has to make sense. This goes back to the question of fit. Your proposal has to make sense for us as an organization. When it comes to the people who are making the decision, don't assume that the selection committee members are experts in your field. Stay away from technical jargon. Use, common, clear, simple language. Use concrete examples of things, and also don't assume that they are, like you in age or professional level either. So there's a lot of things to consider when you are writing a proposal to a funder. As I said before, assessment and evaluation are key. We really, really want to see impacts. We want to see where our money is going, how it's making a difference. To some people, to some funders, that's about numbers. How many people are being impacted or touched by this program through our funding? In some funders' case, we also want to know, how is this qualitatively changing people's lived experience or experience or relationship to Japan or the United States? So, finding out and articulating what your assessment and evaluations are going to be is really, really key to helping donors understand if giving money to this particular proposal or activity makes sense. And my last 2 points are be honest about what you need and what you want. Don't sort of lowball in terms of, you know, how much you think you might need because you think it'll improve your chances of getting money. That is not the case. And don't write what you think we want to hear. A lot of grant administrators like myself have done this for years and can, you know, call, they know disingenuousness when we see it. So it's really important to be clear, to align your missions. Don't make any assumptions. Give all the information that you can and really, really tell us what it is that you need. And so my last 2 points are sort of my biggest pet peeves from my time as a funder and a grant administrator. One of the biggest things to avoid any pitfalls is to contact the funder. Sometimes that is the most critical piece of action that you can take. One, because it helps the funder figure out if it makes sense for you to even apply, for you to even put in the work. Because a good administrator will tell you, you know, this doesn't align, this isn't really what we do, you know, I don't think it's a good fit. And you really want to be able to have that on the front end rather than spending a whole bunch of time on an application or proposal and then not getting it and them telling you because it's not a good fit. So I think all of us have mentioned, you know, contacting the funder directly. We don't mind. They, you know, usually they may not be able to talk to you explicitly about their process or anything like that, but they can sort of bounce ideas, sort of be a bouncing board for your ideas to see if it's a good fit. Because they don't want you to waste your time, and we don't want you to waste ours. Following instructions. You will not believe how many people don't follow instructions on forms, on time, deadlines, and or limitations for word counts and things like that. They really, really do matter. People get disqualified for not following instructions. So that's really one big one. The other one is, again, tied to clarity, a lot of times in writing. Having unclear goals and objectives for your project, for your activity, and steps that are missing and how you are going to achieve them. What are the steps that you're going to take to be able to achieve those outcomes? So this disconnect between your objectives and the steps you're going to get there is something that you have to make explicit. Because to the funder, it makes sense that it appears that you know what it is you're talking about. And so it gives us confidence that if we give you the money, that you'll be able to achieve your goals. However, if we don't have a sense of that from your plan in the proposal, then, you know, it's risk for us, so we don't want to do that. Lack of alignment with vision is something that I've already said. Sometimes even after contacting the funder, we get applicants who still kind of just don't get it. We have a lot of applications that are just generic. It's very clear that they just copied it from one organization to the other, and so it's not tailored to us. So that's definitely a non-starter. Budgets are probably the biggest sort of determining factor a lot of times when we're looking at proposals. Loaded or ambiguous budgets. We want to know where the money is going. You know, we have very specific guidelines in terms of line items for the budget. We have, as Laurel had talked about, limitations on what we will pay for, our limitations on overhead, and things like that. And I have worked for nonprofits for nearly all of my career, and so I know what it is to run a program on a shoestring budget. And so, you know, a lot of times committee members are critical of budgets that are bloated or ambiguous. And then I think there are proposals that are just really, really far-reaching and broad. You know, they kind of underestimate what they need to execute the program or the activity, or they're trying to do too much with too little money or too few resources. So really trying to make sure that your proposal is practical and feasible and doable within what you are proposing. One thing that you also want to think about is, are you looking for funders on an annual basis? Is this a pot of money that you're going to come back to? Are you going to reapply? If so, that creates a different type of relationship than something that you're just applying for as a one-time thing. And so for one who you might return to, it's important to think about a long-term strategy for sustainability of your activity or your program. Because, funding pots, even as a funder, are not infinite. And so we might be able to fund you for 1 year, maybe 2 years, but we can't always guarantee beyond that. And so it's important for you to show that you have plans for how you are going to continue this activity, particularly if it's a multi-year activity that you want to do. One of the other pet peeves is that when somebody sort of receives money for a grant as a vehicle for promoting their own organization, they don't see the funder-fundee relationship as a relationship, sort of being used sort of tit for tat for the money. And so I don't think this is as common in the US-Japan space as in other places I've seen, but I would caution you to really find out from your funder what it is their expectations are. Are you willing and able to abide by those expectations? There are very few funders that'll tell you, we don't want any recognition, we just want to give you the money and get out of here. Those are wonderful funders, but most funders are not that way. They usually have an expectation of some kind of recognition or visibility. And so it's important for you as the grantee to know that and try to figure out what those are and if that's something that you're comfortable with. Something that really frustrates us on the implementation side once you've received funds is, if you have something that happens where you have to bring on a third party or branding recognition challenges. And you really run into this when you have multiple funders for one given activity. And so that's something also that you want to make sure you can negotiate. And the last one, some funders might allow you to reapply. If you've been rejected, they might allow you to reapply. If you do that, I would encourage you to ask for feedback, clear feedback, and ask them if it's worth even reapplying for. And that actually leads into sort of expectations and understandings about sometimes rejections or saying no from funders are about timing. They don't have enough funds fit and or resources, more applications than they have funds for. As I said, follow up with the funder for feedback on your application if they offer. They might have recommendations. We often say, hey, we may not be able to fund this, but you might thinking about this organization for this project. Funding relations are partnerships, so be sure to keep your relationship positive. As both Laurel and Liz talked about, contact with your funder and keeping them apprised of how things are going, because clear communication with your funder is important in all aspects of the process of applying, receiving, implementing your program, and then wrapping up. So thank you very much, and I'm available for questions. I will give this back to you.
Thank you so much, Maya, for your very helpful and interesting presentation, and thank you also to Laurel and Liz. We will take questions at this time if there are any. We only have a few more minutes. So if anyone who's on the call wants to ask a question, now is the time. And I'm going to actually ask one question myself for all of the presenters. if there was one thing that somebody remembered from your presentation tonight that you feel is the most important thing, what is it? Why don't we start with Laurel and then go to Liz and then Maya?
I think for me, I think the most important thing is to do your research. And that I can't stress enough how important it is to look at a funder's website and to talk to them and get to know them before you apply, because it really is, like Maya said, it's a relationship and it's so important. So, you know, once you have a good relationship, even before you get funding, and even if you don't get funding on the first try, the more an organization or a funder knows about you, the stronger your relationship with them will be, and the better they will know you and be able to understand what it is that you're doing. So for me, I think research is number one.
Yeah, I have to go along those same lines. Preparation is probably the most important for fundraising, whether that's getting to know potential sources or clearly defining your needs or why you're fundraising, and then also the cost-benefit analysis that I mentioned and providing benefit and getting everything ready online. That would be most important.
Yeah, I think mine would be a mix of both of those. And I would just say, you know, call the people that you're talking about requesting funding from. Contact in the initial stages can go a long, long way in alleviating some, you know, miscommunications or misunderstandings or lack of clarity or things like that in the process. So I would say the biggest thing is to contact the funder who you're interested in pursuing opportunities with, and ask them questions about, you know, what it makes, if it makes sense to for you to apply. I think contact with the funder is important.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, we're just about out of time, so I'd like to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Especially thank you, Laurel, Liz, and Maya, for giving your time and your expertise on these areas and sharing all of these tips with us. I want to let everybody know that since this is recorded, the video and speaker materials will be available on the US JETAA website probably in the next week or two. And then our next upcoming session is tomorrow night at 8:15 p.m. on March 6th. It's on tools and strategies for membership engagement, and the speakers will be Stephen Horowitz, Christina Omori, and Wesley Julian. Check out our Facebook page and our website for more information. All right, thank you all. Good night.